So my name's Kristi Mansfield. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Seer Data Analytics, and it's really a pleasure for me to introduce to you today Kylie Burgess and Antony Deck. And Kylie and Ant are really incredible pioneers who've helped turn the vision of data sharing in Tasmania from government into community to make that a reality and a vision. And this is really the first whole of government data to community sharing initiative around Australia. And we're very proud to have the opportunity to talk about this today. So let me firstly introduce to you Kylie Burgess, who is the Shared Learning Coordinator from Burnie Works in Burnie in Tasmania, and Antony Deck is the Assistant Director of Measurement, Evaluation and Learning at the Department of Premier and Cabinet in Tasmania. So this is a very exciting initiative, and Kylie, it seems like many years ago that we were talking about this, but in fact, we were talking about the value of government to community sharing in about 12 months ago in Spark Festival alongside your colleagues in Burnie and also with the team in Logan and Maranoka and Burke. So Kylie, perhaps we could start off by some of your reflections. What's happened in that time, do you think? And then we'll get into, you know, what we're doing now and your personal journeys as you've contributed to this this incredible initiative.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Kristi, and great to be part of this conversation. There are moments in this community ground up community development work, trying to do systems change that, you know, feel like you're not getting very far. And then there's moments where you stand back and go, what has happened in the last 12 months? So this is a great opportunity. I mean, this arrangement and the partnership that we have now with the Tasmanian government around the first 1,000 days particularly and the child youth wellbeing strategy has evolved. It wasn't, I don't know if it was an apple in our eye back 12 months ago, Ant. But we certainly made strides in terms of access to the quantitative data to be able to inform community decision making around where they see community sees the issues, what information do they need to understand those issues, and then how do they use that information to create action. So that this is a very exciting thing, and it's great to be able to report on this today. And kudos to all of our other partners that might be in the audience as well, that we've needed help from all sorts to create the systems changes that need to be made to make these changes. And the other thing I think for a highlight for us, which hopefully we'll get to talk about a little bit further, is our Community Knowledge Collector project as well. So being able to really bring to the fore and elevate the value of communities being able to collect their own stories and have that as valuable as the administrative and population level data.
That's awesome. Thanks, Kylie. I'm going to get you to explain a little bit about Burnie Works and the community of Burnie and share with the audience a little bit about the work that you're doing. But before I do that, Anne, can you share with us your own personal story? In our conversations over the last few months, I understand this has been many years in the making. Could you share the journey that you've been on personally to this point?
So thanks, Kristi. So, you know, I've had involvement in gathering data and providing data for various purposes over, 20 odd years in the state government, including things like Tony Vincent's dropping off the edge report, doing some of my own data linkage for particular projects, and also representing on data linkage. So been in and out of the data policy area for a while. Part of that work has also been participating in things like place-based projects and trials and pilots. We did a social network analysis south of Hobart, and that sort of gives you some idea about what you could do and where you might want to put some of government's resources at also helping communities out. And I've also had a bit of involvement in areas like social impact investment. So as a commissioner, what are you purchasing, and how do you know what you're getting is providing outcomes for people, and what are those outcomes. So if you think about this sort of history coming together, and there's a sort of like a place element, and there's an outcome element, and there's also this sort of data policy component, and so this has come together, if you like, in this agreement that we have recently, and it is exciting because it's a time when those sorts of elements about sharing data, sense making, and value adding to that at a community level is becoming really prominent nationally, particularly with the 4 priority reform areas under closing the gap. And so not so much a personal journey, but there's definitely a shift in government policy making and decision making to move in a direction where we're working much closer with community and communities around Tasmania.
Yeah, and part of that, of course, is then the sharing of data and information, data assets that are held by governments, in your case, many different Tasmanian state agencies, to make visible and accessible the information that could be of use for decision-making in local places, Kylie. So share with me, if you don't mind, your personal story, how you got to this place in this moment.
Yeah, just listening to Ant's reflection there. So really, my journey has been quite eclectic, from on the ground nursing, really practical service delivery land, as I call it. Then thinking, something wrong with this system. Why isn't it working? Who makes these decisions? Why is this investment this way? What's that all about? Who designs these programs? And then moving actually into government and spending quite a bit of time in aged care reform and community care reform, and looking at the minimum data sets that existed 15 years ago and asking questions about, well, hang on, how can communities apply for grants if they don't actually know what it is that government funds and what it looks like on the ground, and what proportion of the funding goes on Meals on Wheels, and why not nursing? So being able to kind of wrestle internally from a policy and program design perspective, and then moving back out into community in peak body land, and working with Catholic Social Services Australia, which is a formative time in my career, and that Catholic Social Services Australia, along with Jesuit Services, actually commissioned that Tony Vincent report, Dropping Off the Edge. So Tony's no longer with us, but his legacy remains, because he was one of the first academics to really unpack what's happening at a local level that means that some people's trajectories never get better. And so just feeling a sense of pride being part of the team that worked with those major stakeholders, that has meant that piece of work has shone a light on the what's happening at a local level, postcode level even, that determines some people's trajectories. And also that work is not perfect, because that team struggled to get the data they needed to be able to paint the right picture. So then I was only just rereading my journals from a few years ago, just took a bit of a sabbatical and thinking, where to next? And at that stage in the policy realm and what's happening across Australia, as Ant flagged, we've also got this moment in time. The Stronger Places, Stronger People project was getting up, joint funded by state and federal government. And my position didn't exist when I decided to leave Canberra and think, well, where else can I be of service in community? And now we have this moment in time where some resources have gone in, thanks to government investment at both state, federal and local level, to create opportunities for capacity building in community. So we are in Burnie Works. Burnie Works has been going since 2010 in various iterations, but this investment in the last 4 or 5 years has actually meant that as a community, we're able to name up and put the framework around the potential of place-based collaborative work. And my role is linked to, well, how do we get the knowledge, the data, the processes so that we can make sense and meaning out of that, so that then community can be truly involved and engaged in decision-making for action for the issues that they see as important. And how do we work then in partnership with government so that government is achieving its strategies as well? Because we all want to see better places and better life trajectories for those who are most affected by disadvantage.
So Kylie, Burnie Works is working with the community, the whole community in Burnie, to, as well as individuals and people, to better understand what a community-led initiative looks like. When you say community-led, is this policy, is this funding, is this service delivery? What do you mean by community-led?
We're still working that out. And I'm not sure that anyone involved in this work across Australia actually has the true, worked out exactly what does that look like. Here at Burnie Works, even in the last 12 months, we're doing a lot of work around supporting community working groups. So working groups, we consider community to be anybody who lives, works, or has an interest, a personal interest in this community called Burnie. We have some initiatives that work across the whole northwest coast of Tasmania as well. So we kind of, when we think place-based, we think Burnie, but the way that we work is also in partnership, particularly in the employment space across the whole northwest coast of Tasmania. So we're trying to be more and more intentional about who do we need around the table, who really understands, who's most affected by the service systems and the issues that are facing community, and how do we make sure that they bring their expertise and it is seen as at the same level, the same value as anybody else who cares about that issue as well. So trying to bring that into the way that we're structured, the way that we do community engagement, the way that we look at participation, and the way that we communicate and bring people into issues that are arising, and so that we can work out exactly what it is and the actions that would bring about change.
And so you've talked a lot about value. What is the true value of this work here? What is the true value of the Tasmanian government sharing data and information with the community of Burnie?
There's a whole lot of enablers that are here in Burnie. There's cultural enablers, there's a whole lot of enablers, but one of the biggest enablers for this work in the last couple of years has been the Tasmanian government's commitment to and release of its child youth wellbeing strategy. So what a strategy like that means for a community work that we do in the collective impact way is it actually gives us a lever point. It's okay, well, this is government's priority. This is how they're going to invest. What does it mean and what does it look like here in Burnie? And so maybe, I can't think of time, goes so fast now, maybe 18 months ago, we've held a number of workshops, particularly looking at 0 to 5, first 1,000 days, with parents, service providers, nursing, so all the systems that it takes to ensure healthy thriving from 0 to 5. And actually then the community has responded to that strategy, and we can see, well, we know what's happening in some of the systems. Parents can tell the stories of how difficult it is at the moment for various reasons to get their child health checks, which then has this flow on impact to other things in their lives. But we don't actually have the data to be able to complete that picture. So with this arrangement, with being able to partner with the government and agree that the first 1,000 days indicators in that child youth wellbeing strategy are going to be our indicators here in community as well, then we can bring together the data into the conversation with the qualitative data, with the stories, the lived experience, the service provider knowledge, so that we have a holistic picture about, well, that sounds like a great solution, that new program, but we're not sure it will work on the ground if we work in this particular way. So we start to bring about a sense and being able to bring sense and meaning making. So I just offered the first 1,000 days, particularly with the child youth wellbeing strategy, but we also here at Burnie Works have done a great deal of work even before my time. The team here has been working hard with community, industry, business. So the conditions are set around education, employment, and a few different other focus areas as well.
Thanks, Kylie. That's really great to know. And it's so many different data assets that are being shared and to the community of Burnie. Kylie, I'll come back to the Knowledge Collector project in a moment, because I know we want to talk about what the challenges are and what the opportunities are around building capability and knowledge within the community. But just if you don't mind explaining about the value creation for the Tasmanian government, why share data with the community?
Yeah, sure, Kristi. So it's important that we're able to engage with communities around Tassie for the various sort of, social policies and strategies that we collectively work on. A way of doing that, we heavily relied on community organisations and communities for the development of the Child and Youth Wellbeing Strategy, which was released in August last year. And part of that engagement is to keep on engaging and keep on hearing about the changing attitudes towards wellbeing, but also how the strategy, in its first 12 months is being implemented, and what kind of influence are we seeing. So, there's a whole range of actions in that strategy, and the indicators that Kylie's referring to will be coming out in only a few weeks. That relate to the first 1,000 days and the wellbeing domains that we assign to, which is using the NEST domains, a national framework for early childhood learning and development. And so, first of all, we need to keep on engaging, and secondly, we often talk about meaningful engagement or long-term engagement or reciprocal engagement. There's different ways of describing it. But a really good way of sort of proving those terms is in the practical things that you do. So sharing data, getting that local community to be able to look at that. How does it stack up against what we think are important for indicators for wellbeing? What does the community think about those indicators, as well as what we're doing in our strategies? And that is, really valuable information that comes back to us about from an evaluation and review perspective about what we're doing. So, we kind of have to have that, that closed loop approach to be able to properly learn about how we're going about, social policy in general. And this is particularly relevant to the Child and Youth Wellbeing Strategy, because the priorities and the actions and the funding allocation, a good chunk of that was determined by what the community said was important.
And so, because this is not an easy thing to do, is it? I mean, governments around Australia, federal agencies, and there are some that are already committed to sharing data with communities, and there are some federal agencies that are on that journey. And there are state agencies around Australia who are already doing it as well. I'll note New South Wales and the sharing of data to the Burke Tribal Council and community there at Maranoka. And there are many other examples of individual solutions to share data with communities. Yet this is a whole of government into the community of Burnie, with potential to potentially scale out once we see how this work goes. It is quite an enormous step forward in this notion of data sovereignty for community benefit. How hard was this?
I think it's been a long time, as you introduced the session. It's been a good while in the making. So it's hard because the culture of institutions is not kind of predisposed to opening up and sharing its information. It's hard because some of the information has got, or the data sets, if you like, have got different legislative restrictions or controls around its collection. It's hard because we often don't have the resources, the funding to be able to pull data out of our systems, analyse it and share it for different means than standard reporting processes that often occur between states and the Commonwealth. So yeah, it can be difficult for lots of reasons. And in this case, I think what we've taken is to pilot how can we get the information that we need for the indicators and start sharing that with the Burnie community easily. And then when we want to be able to move through perhaps more complex information requests, then we can work through the complexity that might come with those, with that sort of sharing. But it does help to be able to have a platform in place, a means of doing this, and it also helps to have an understanding about mutually what the two parties are wanting to share and why they want to share it, and that all contributes to that sort of affecting the right cultural environment for being able to work with communities.
Yeah, we hear that quite a lot, that we now have an authorising environment and a policy setting that enables sharing of data with community. And we have a really interesting, and of course the Seer platform being an enabler to facilitate that sharing. Yet I suppose it's the willingness, isn't it? It's the willingness for people to come together and work on this work. And I think that really comes to the next question that I wanted to ask you, Kylie, which is around trust and relationship building. This work wouldn't be possible without the trust, I think, that the Burnie community has, and that has been built with government agencies in Tasmania and the Department of Social Services and others, Department of Education, of course. Kylie, is there a trust deficit between community and government and therefore people? And how do you overcome that?
Well, trust is at the heart of every human interaction. And even now, we get questioned, well, why does the community want to know that? It's like, well, actually, the community knows what's going on underneath that administrative data anyway. We promise we won't publish it. We promise we won't, the reputation of governments, there's a lot of sensitivities. And I think we're so not there yet, but one of the challenges for us and with Ant and his team is going to be, okay, now we get the data. What are the processes that show what collaborative sense of meaning making can look like so that government can trust community with its own data, with its data, that we're not actually out to, we're out to understand, okay, why is it that there's this, something going on with breastfeeding rates? What is it that's happening in the antenatal system as it transitions, into the Child Family Learning Centre that we are so blessed to have here in Burnie? It's trusting that community has the capacity to be able to work with information and data that in a way that's going to benefit everybody. So that relationship building, it's all through relationship building. I think Tasmania has a lot of enablers. One of them is, a relatively small public service in the sense that, our relationship with Department of Premier and Cabinet particularly, but also Department of Education means that, I can email someone and kind of go, look, we've got this thing brewing. What do you, as well as the people on the ground who work in those departments too. So you've sort of got, we're able to work together to bring people towards a shared understanding of what the issue is. And then it's not we want this data, give us that, it's actually, hang on, how do we frame it? And then how do we work together with the resources and skills that are at various levels to be able to, really move towards whatever community-led is going to look like into the future.
Fantastic. So I have a question from the audience I'll just ask to both of you. Have you had to convince anyone that there is value in data? And if so, what are the strategies that you use to do this?
I'll jump in and say that, first of all, if a community organisation like Burnie Works has gone through the process of consulting about a particular topical issue or something that's of interest, and they've asked for the data, then government, I think, has the responsibility to listen to that, listen to the request, and give it the attention that it deserves, because there's a legitimate need to want to learn and understand more, and just because we're the holders of information doesn't mean to say that we're the safe or the lock that has to be permanently closed on that information. So there's lots of important things that can be learned from the data that government can hold. But also there's that other element about, well, we're collecting information on behalf of citizens through a lot of the services. So, that information is actually owned by Tasmanians in this case. And then there's an element where there might be a regulatory or a statutory responsibility to collect information. And I think that's when the discussion or the debate sort of starts coming into play about, well, what information can we provide and how do we go about it? Because those highly regulated areas of government services tend to be probably some of the more difficult areas to be able to persuade on, just sort of general principles of open data sharing. And I'm not saying that it doesn't occur, it's just it is more difficult. And so the approach to take is usually like we're trying to look at a particular objective or a particular sort of research question or a particular outcome, and investigating whether this is legitimate or can be worked through to be able to do the underlying analysis to help inform the thinking around those sorts of outcomes, whatever they might be, whether they're sort of like justice or police or education or anywhere in health. So that's a varying debate, and it kind of like replies varying degrees, I think, of I don't know, argumentativeness, if you wanted to think of a term, and but also practical sort of policy approach. That's a government answer.
So I'll give the community answer. I did notice another question pop up around privacy. I can address that too. I think what we're finding, and the same as anyone out there in our Stronger Places, Stronger People team from DSS, kudos to you too. I think what we're finding is we're learning with government how to put the ask. So the more specific we can be about a particular data set and exactly what information we need and how we want it presented actually helps, because it communicates very clearly. So it's not just, we want to know about something. Like there's a bit of work that needs to be done. Now that takes capacity and resourcing and capability. So let's just be real that this work doesn't just happen. And the more that we expect that community is able to make these asks specifically and deal with them well with best practice, that's going to have to be resourced. So if we're truly in agreement from a government and community perspective that this work we're going to move towards community-led decision making, that's a reality. So we're very lucky here in Burnie because we, through Stronger Places, Stronger People, we're able to invest in some of that capacity building with Seer and with the two levels of government. So we also are real. We're not data analysts. We don't want to be data analysts. So there's something here about being able to understand, and we're still wrestling with this. What not just what data do we need, but where do we get it from? How do you ask for it? And then what form do you want it back in? So that one can imagine, like, you know, Burnie it's not a huge city. There's a number of schools. So we don't ask for individual school data because we're not into, you know, we don't want to shame schools. We don't want to, the sensitivities, I guess, around school attendance or student wellbeing. We pull it out to look at the trends and the themes at the macro level. So that means we're not after data sets where privacy is going to be an issue. And we're not data analysts, and we don't have the systems in place to have, you know, security around confidentiality. So it's about navigating with, you know, I work a lot with Ant, obviously, and our colleagues in DSS. What is that data ask, and what's the knowledge that we need from that? How do we need it presented in a way that then community can work with it?
Yeah, and of course, just to pick up on the data sharing and the measures in place to maintain privacy, I think we're applying privacy perturbation rules as that data is managed as domain data products for technical people, and then that is shared through the Seer platform with the community of Burnie. So that is valuable to maintain the trust equation that we spoke about earlier, Kylie. I want to ask if you could talk about the Community Knowledge Collector project, because you did talk about capacity and community. Could you share with us what that is about?
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and be brief because it's quite a passion project here in Burnie, but in partnership with our DSS colleagues. We were, it's just lovely. I'll start with a story because it's all about stories. The leader of our Child Family Learning Centre was contacted by an academic wanting to know how can we interview the families that don't attend the centre to understand why they don't attend the centre. And it started a conversation really, but here, because academic, you know, the people that would know why some people don't attend the centre are actually the people that attend the centre if they had a coffee with their friend and said, hey, why aren't you attending the centre? Like, what is it that means you don't feel very comfortable to come through the front door? Yeah. And so anyway, kind of got us thinking, it's like, what if we could tip this thing on its head? And what if, you know, if we had a team of people that we could provide safe training, you know, to have conversations in the community on the key themes to bring back the qualitative data, then, you know, we're building capacity in the community. We're honouring and valuing the fact that the knowledge is already there. And we elevating, shifting the power dynamic, I guess, that, you know, often consultants or academics will come into a community with their research question, do all their research, and then kind of leave, you know, and that's great. But how are we building the capacity of the community? So through funding, we were able to source funding, and tomorrow is the very first face-to-face learning pathway session for a micro-credential program designed by UTAS. And we have 13 community knowledge collectors. And we're co-designing the course with UTAS so that it meets the needs of community. It's kind of like, you know, citizen social scientists. Like, we've done it, we trust people with apps to go and count birds, but how can we support people to then work with the Burnie Works team, supported with a coach. We have resources so this is all supported as well, and fieldwork opportunities, as well as remuneration.
Absolutely important.
And again, it's the investment, it's the resourcing, it's the value. So changing the system and changing that power dynamic about what knowledge is important or most valuable, depending on who collects it. So yeah, we haven't got, we part of a number of groups with critical friends across the country. So the idea is that what we're designing and developing actually can be shared with any community. So what are we learning? What processes. So we've already had to kind of rethink our volunteer policy here and our participation policy and our remuneration policy. And so it's forcing us to come back to that community-led, like what organizational processes and structures need to be in place so that we can truly enable and support community to be part of their own knowledge collection for sense of meaning making collectively.
And that's the other part of the data storytelling element, isn't it? That I think we're going to get to in a moment. Before I do that, thank you, Kylie. I'm going to launch a poll and ask everybody to participate in this. So the question is, what do you believe are the most important skill sets for communities engaging in data sharing and collaboration? And so there are a number of questions there that you could answer. I hope people are seeing this. Is that poll? Oh yeah, great. It's coming through. I can see that there are answers coming through. And while we're waiting for that, because I'll publish the result in a moment, I just wanted to pick up on a question that's come through from someone in the audience, and Chris, and I'm going to get to Rebecca and Tim's questions in a moment, but keen to hear more about and how you got Premier and Cabinet to agree to community data sharing to begin with. And it sounds like Chris has been struggling for a decade to get a commitment in the West.
So I can't underline the importance of closing the gap enough. If you think about First Nations people for a long time wanting to try and shift where information sits, the power of decision making, and who's doing what in their own communities. All of that, applies to what we're talking about today. Those broad concepts, and because the effort was put into those 4 policy reform areas about transferring information so that community-owned and run organisations can have the information that they need to be able to design their services and do their own analysis. Then thinking about transforming government, and this is probably going back to the question about the culture of government, but also why it's a priority to be able to engage with communities and have that full cycle engagement. So, Kylie was very polite when she was talking about researchers. There's a term I've heard her use called extractive research, which is, I think is actually a really good term because it relates to what we're talking about. And that is when information is extracted out of a community, it's not provided back in an accessible format, or it's not provided back at all. And so that sort of full cycle engagement requires that to happen. And DPAC has got it through the machinery of government, has had a closure of one department and a whole heap of people and function come into it. And I think that has meant that from a central agency, we now have a good amount of sort of clout, if you like, to be able to continue to do this work. And sometimes it's just aligning of the people, the policy, the systems, the machinery of government to be able to, and of course the priority of the day of the government. And we've got a government that wants to, talks about making decisions from the heart and supporting people so that they can achieve their best, irrespective of where they come from and where they live in Tasmania. So that's these contexts and component parts of the bureaucracy coming together are important.
Very interesting, thank you. And I couldn't agree more. The policy, the people, and the times. And we'll talk a bit about that in a moment because, of course, we had the federal treasurer's first budget come through yesterday. We'll talk about what that means for the future of data sharing with communities, which is very interesting. But before that, let me share the results, and thanks for everybody who's participated. So I hope that you can see that. And the results are, Kylie, probably not unsurprisingly, based on your insights and what you're doing, data translation, storytelling and communication on the ground, and leading community sense making and meaning making processes. So that's really exciting and interesting. Any comments you'd like to make on that result there, Kylie?
Yeah, and maybe this taps into, sorry, I've got Tim's question as well. Your comments on collaboration on data sharing, top-down approach, or is a bottom-up or grassroots a better way to go? Okay, I'm going to do my both and.
Yeah.
And I think this is the gift that this moment in time offers us. I couldn't do what I'm doing without the government's commitment and people like Ant. And I'm going to be bold and say that Ant can't deliver on what he needs to without, or at least we can show what's possible without an organisation like Burnie Works on the ground, and then throw into the mix, other intermediaries and definitely our relationship with Seer Data as well. So I think top down, bottom up, we've all got to do our part, and that's true collaboration. And at some point, and I suspect anyone who signed up and is still with us in this webinar, you've done so because you want to see change. We saw the list, there's government people, there's service providers, it's very difficult when you're in one part of the system and you don't have kind of rubbing points or gears. I think someone used, was that your analogy the other day? If you can't connect in to another part of the system that's trying to change as well, and have a shared, so how can we do this? How can we start many of our conversations now here at Burnie Works with how can what we do help you? So without that, you can't separate, because these are massive social and system changes. And I think it's exciting. I know when I was in the public service, we couldn't have these conversations. We couldn't just pick up the phone with our stakeholders on the ground. So the times are changing, and for you shapeshifters and change makers out there, keep pushing.
Yeah, that's right. And the innovation that you are and we are together driving forward, that means that we can work on these problems together with local stories and data storytelling, as well as the data that sits within government and the data that's held within community together to get a really clear picture of the story. Kylie, can you comment on storytelling and how that comes to life in community? Are there things or there are elements of data storytelling that make it more compelling so that community can be heard? Rebecca's got the question, what are the top 3 things data brings to storytelling that makes it more compelling?
Yeah, I feel like we're just at the beginning of this, and there's many communities, particularly our Indigenous colleagues, that could probably speak to this. They're further down the path than what we are here in Burnie. So I want to make, just say that I think lots of communities are wrestling with this and possibly a bit further down the track. I feel like we're moving from, we just quickly need a case study. There's something here about connecting the true lived experience with then, the quantitative data and other knowledge. So we talk about data and information coming together to create knowledge when it's all combined. And story cuts through. And as a society, I think, our culturally recognising the ancientness, I guess, of First Nations people and their cultures as well around storytelling. And the shift that storytelling is just as valid. So there is moving away from this hierarchy that knowledge is, more important than other knowledge. I'm just trying to come up with I feel like we haven't made this concrete enough with actual examples. But the thing
context, isn't it? It's good context to the quantity of information. A hype of figures is one thing, but what does it mean? And that's all about context. You know, we know that from sort of like social policy. And so, you know, what I hear when you're describing, when you're talking, Kylie, is that, you know, that community input is giving context, which is putting the story around the quantitative information, so that you get a rounded view of what it is that you're trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, something came up we get examples every day. So I'm just trying to think of a really concrete example to make this real for people. So in the census data, no, it might be the data we're looking at actually for the first 1,000 days, Ant, what Seer's just done. Something about numbers of cars. So in some of our most lowest socioeconomic suburbs, if you just took the households with numbers of cars from the census, it could look like, well, there's no transport problem there because they're, you know, wow, they've got a high proportion of cars per household. And then one of our colleagues who has worked in a community development role in these suburbs said, yeah, they might have 4 cars, but they actually don't have, you know, people are struggling financially. Are those cars all registered? Are those cars, so it's probably better to look at the registration numbers, not just the numbers of cars, if you're trying to get a sense of where there's transport issues. So if you just take, you know, so it is that cutting and dicing that just, yeah, you could say, oh, that area doesn't need buses because, you know, most households have 4 cars on average. It's like, yeah, but how many people in the household are on suspended driver's licenses? Like, there's, just because you've got 4 cars doesn't mean that you can afford the petrol that goes in their tanks, or the registration, or the repairs, or the. So that's just a really basic example that, you know, without the story, you could be making high-level policy decisions that you may not have thought about the actual experience of those neighbourhoods.
And it pushes you to seek more information, doesn't it? I mean, that's what I hear in your example, Kylie. Pushes you to go and seek, well, you know, the lived experience or the story that's created around that is actually indicating to you that you're not looking at the right data. And so go back and keep on searching, keep on looking, keep on asking the question so that you can get the data to answer that question. And, you know, a reference to the previous comment about top-down and bottom-up approaches, I mean, there's a great example that you can set indicators from a top-down strategy level of government. But when you talk to people in the community, they start saying, well, okay, if you want to know about how this is related to an outcome for me, about being able to get to you know, work or take, you know, family obligations, whatever it might be, then you need to understand that you've got to look at other information, because this is my issue. And that's that sense making.
And so I guess we're really talking about very local, very granular kind of questions where community and government come together, decide, is this the right policy, or is this the right programming? What do we need to do differently to get a better outcome in places all over, initially in Burnie, of course, but with the potential across Tasmania, and then more broadly, I think, nationally. And can we just talk a bit about what the future could look like as a result of this work that we're doing now? As I said, we've got a commitment from federal government to a wellbeing budget and indicators that align to wellbeing. And I suppose, you know, it's evident that federal and other states will be, you know, curious to know of how this work goes in Tasmania. You know, what is the value of sharing data from many different government agencies and assets sharing into local communities, recognising that each place is different. There are dynamics that are different. There are strengths that are different in places all over Australia and the world. And what does the future look like when this really, as we move through this?
Well, highly subjective to the government of the day, of course. But I think personally, my ideal would be something along the lines, and you used a couple of words there about measuring and assets. we need to have a better understanding about our data assets. You know, like what do we have? How is it being used? What research or evaluation has it been applied to? And imagine if we could publish that, and so that communities weren't going, I don't know what to ask for. You know, like I'd like to do something, but I don't know how I can be better informed and approach government to ask for it. So that would be good, and that would be part of sort of like an open data policy framework. Of course, the mechanisms to be able to share that, and you mentioned, you know, working with Burnie Works, but also other areas. You know, partners are important because Burnie Works has been invested in and been doing what it's doing for some time. And so that, you know, Burnie Works is an intermediary to be able to affect that, the kind of community development that it does, and also the, you know, the look into the service system. You know, that is not easily replicable, you know, in other communities. And so, you know, communities are at different places, and government has to recognise that. You know, the reference that Kylie made earlier on is that community, particularly Burnie, when you've got someone like an organisation like Burnie Works, can be spinning quite fast in its thinking and its reform, where it's going and its directions, and government's a much bigger, slower cog, and these teeth, you know, it's like a set of gears, mean that they can mesh together, but the government, you know, just tends to work slower. So, you know, what's your place-based policy? How do you organise across agencies on how it represents, government represents itself to communities, so that people know who to talk to? Kylie talked about, you know, getting on the phone or emailing someone. Not every location can do that. You know, not everyone can do that, or people that are acting on behalf of a community or with a community. So there's policy frameworks that need to be developed. There's open data policy frameworks that need to be developed. There's also just general, how do we work with community frameworks that have to be developed. And we've kind of got to not just sit around and, you know, traditional sit in the back office developing project plans to do that. You know, we don't have the luxury of time. We've got to get on with doing and learning, and that sort of rapid cycle kind of development, at the same time as using that to inform how we think and how we strategize and plan around this kind of stuff. Because it is complex, there's many moving parts, there's lots of players and interests, and to overcome some of the barriers or challenges to sharing information, we're going to have to sort of work in that way, in a fairly dynamic way, to be able to move forward, I think. So, you know, but look, the future would be that we're able to have a broad set of protocols for which we can share, you know, XYZ data. You know, we're not talking about, you know, case management service delivery. We're talking about usually de-identified, confidentialised information for policy planning and analysis and decision making. So a broad set of rules for that would be handy, because it can cut out a lot of the red tape that goes on between agencies having to work out, well, who should make a decision about release of this information? Does it always have to go to the secretary, or you know, the cabinet, or, you know, if you think about the structures of government, or can it be released because it's it follows you know, a set of you know, rules about what's inside the data, and then, you know, what's outside of that, what's external to that. You know, this is specific data. It's for a very specific purpose. We can't aggregate up. We can't confidentialise, you know, through suppress or perturbation, because we've got to have accuracy in what it's in what it's informing. And so the measures in place to be able to do that, and so that we don't go through this sort of, you know, 6-month cycle having to go to Crown Law to get advice about all our legislation and what we can and can't do. And, you know, sometimes we have to do that, but definitely data sharing agreements that are a little bit more accessible, so that consumers and citizens out there can go, well, if I'm going to enter into this, what am I going to be required to do? Like, you know, just being clear about that process, I think, is work that we can do in government.
Fantastic, really inspiring, and I see the pathway. It's exciting. Kylie, what about you? What do you see the future?
Yeah, I think from the community end, and again, I'm just picking up on Gillian's question there. Sorry, I'm just trying to be efficient. The fully representation, you know, and that comes back to that whole community-led, the evolution of that, and the ways in which communities, whether you have a, you know, a collective impact, a backbone function or not, like what are your, when you're working in community, how are we constantly asking that question, who is not here and why are they not here? And some communities are going to do that depending on their demographics. You know, they're going to have greater skill and capacity to do that simply because they're in that environment. So we're working very closely with our Palawa colleagues and Connected Beginnings to whatever we do, you know, what's the cultural lens? How do we do it together? How do we, so that they're not going and collecting data and we're collecting, you know, this is about Burnie. So how do we do this in a way that works for that cultural group as well as the other populations represented here. And the other thing, I think, just quickly looking at the time, it's we're trying to codify so that everyone just go, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we, you know, we had a Burnie Works or a Logan Together or a, you know, empowered community. What is that function in this shared learning space? Anyone out there who wants to join me in that thinking, feel free to reach out, because if we don't codify it, it can't be valued. So that list of skill sets and capacities that came up in the poll, they're all needed. They're shifting, you know, out into community. So, and government, like where do those capacities sit? And how then are they resourced, and the skills and training or whatever is required to build the capacity to do this and do this well in this new way. Yeah, so that it's not just, oh, that's nice, that community gets to do it. It's up to chance. It's not up to chance. And Kristi, I know you're nodding. And we're constantly having these conversations with Ant and with Kristi. What is required and how is it resourced if it is valued?
So it can be scaled.
Yeah, so it can be scaled. Absolutely. Yeah.
Across Australia, or yeah. And you mentioned one of the partners that you are working with as well, Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, I believe, too, in Burnie, who will be collaborating with you on sense making. So as we finish up, I want to also ask everyone if you would be happy to, you know, come back, share this around. I was going to do another poll, but I don't think I have much time left. But I wanted to, you know, congratulate you both and thank you for all of your work, the work that you do together in collaboration. Like, that is true partnership. I think, you know, through our conversation today, it's evident it is true partnership, and all the work that you are doing to create what the future might be for communities to work in partnership with governments to get better outcomes for all Tasmanians and for all Australians. So thank you for your time. And we'll touch base again soon and keep everybody up to date on how the journey is going. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.